All right, welcome back, my friends. Section E2. What's happening behind the scenes here when we short a stock? Well, what's happening behind the scenes is part mental exercise for you, and then it's just execution. But let's talk about what's really going on for any of you that want to get deeper into what's really happening. Because shorting is actually one of the most successful trading strategies in the world. Why would hedge fund managers want to short? Well, they think a stock or a company is doing badly and it's going to fall. And so if it's you locate the shares and then you borrow them. And your broker specializes in facilitating this. So because you borrowed shares, you only have to return the same number of shares. Now, a lot of people get hung up on this word borrow. So let's get deeper into that and we can work through some of the mechanics. Like, where are you borrowing shares from anyway? I mean, do you really borrow the shares? Let's talk about Bob and Karen. So Bob and Karen are, talking about a loan. So let's see here. Bob needs a loan. And Karen is going to give him a loan. Now, Karen could loan Bob a car, right? And then he has to give back a car. I mean, that makes sense, right? But Karen could loan him money, and then he has to give back money. Well, in the world of stocks, traders can loan other traders shares. In fact, Karen, when she makes a loan to Bob of money, she gets paid interest while she waits to get paid back. The same is true for shares. When Karen loans Bob some shares, she gets paid interest. In fact, Robinhood and other brokers now allow you, if you're holding a stock, to lend out your shares. Guess what's happening to those shares? They're getting shorted. That's exactly what's happening. So that's what's happening. So the broker facilitates all of this, so you don't have to think about this transaction. You don't ever see this happening in real time. But there's a question here. And the question is it really happening? Did you really borrow the shares? Did you really borrow them? Did you really borrow them? Or did you promise that you absolutely will? It sounds crazy, but that's what's actually happening most of the time. You're most of the time just promising that you absolutely promise that by the end of the day you're going to borrow those shares. Now, your broker is handling everything behind the scenes, and you don't have to worry about it. It's not for you to worry about. You just borrow 100 shares of a stock. You have to pay back 100 shares of that stock later. The broker facilitates all of it, and you don't have to worry about it at all. So here's what happens when you short a stock. You borrow 100 shares at $2 a share. Okay? Great. You borrow 100 shares at $2 a share. You sell them immediately. And you make $200, and it's sitting in your account. Awesome. Now, in order to borrow those shares, you might have paid 2 pennies per share. Where does that money go? It goes to Karen. It goes to the person who lent you the shares. Okay, that's cool so far. So you borrowed the shares, you sold them for $200, and then later in the day, the stock price falls to $1. You buy back the shares and return them to Karen. It's like, what if you borrowed your friend's car? Okay? You borrowed your friend's car, and your friend says, okay, man, all I want you to do is bring back the car. And you're like, you just want me to bring back the car? Yeah, just the car. Yeah, okay. So you bring back the car, and there's no wheels, there's no steering wheel, there's no seats, and it's on fire in the back. Well, you said, well, told me I got to return the car. You didn't tell me what shape the car has to be in. I mean, it does seem weird, right? You borrowed 100 shares, they were $2, and when you give them back, they're worth less. Karen's going to be pretty mad, right? No, not necessarily. She wanted to hold that stock for a long time. That was her decision, not yours. You're not responsible for it. So instead of borrowing money, behind the scenes, Bob is just borrowing shares. And he has to pay back that loan in shares. So Bob borrows 100 shares when they're trading at $1 a share. He sells those shares and now he has $100. Now he's also got an obligation to return those shares, right? So he's got to go back and get them later on. He owes Karen $100 shares at a later date. The broker will take a fee for setting up the loan and give some of that money to Karen. So the share price then falls to 50 cents. Remember, Bob owes Karen 100 shares. So he buys 100 shares for Karen for $50. Now, he doesn't have to buy extra shares to impress Karen. He doesn't have to do anything extra. He just hands those shares back to Karen through the broker. And the loan is complete. It seems like a crappy deal for Karen, right? Well, that's not your problem, and it's not Bob's problem. That's not his problem. What we're doing here is we are saying this stock in particular, let's say it's VTVT. It'll just take a minute for this to load up. So let's just say VTVT, it jumps up today. It has no business being up here. The company's a piece of garbage. So you borrow these shares. I can't write borrow with my keyboard. So you borrow those shares, okay? You borrow them and you sell them immediately. And they're you basically collect, right here, you collect $1. VTVT then later on in the day falls to 82 cents. You get to keep 18 cents. You buy 100 shares back and you hand them back to the person that you borrowed them from, and you're like, here's your crappy car back. And it's nobody can complain about it. It's a perfectly legal transaction. I know it sounds weird, but this is what happens every day in the market. Somebody out there will lend you their shares. Now, what if they want them back immediately? What if they say, oh, crap? That's a good question. There's nothing they can really do about it. You owe them the shares and you got to pay it. At some point in time, the market runs out of borrowed shares and you'll start getting notices that there aren't enough of shares out there and you got to give them back. So you will occasionally get something like that. It'd be like 1 out of 500 times that it actually ever happens. All right. Going to remove all of the drawings off the screen here, and we'll proceed to the next lesson.